Okay, we were talking about disorders of the colon and rectum. We were on, I think, slide 67. So we're going to start out from there. We have to get up through 108, I believe, is the end. So disorders of the colon and rectum, we did diverticulitis. Let's move on from there. Irritable bowel syndrome. When you're talking about irritable bowel syndrome, you're talking about colon spasms, the muscles contracting and you can't control them, explosive release of feces, bad, a lot of gas, a lot of cramping. Um, what causes inflammatory bowel disease? One could be ulcerative colitis. That's a fancy way of saying ulcers in the colon. It could cause things like diarrhea, extreme emergency, gotta go to the bathroom now, rectal bleeding, Crohn's disease. All right, let's try this again. I'm not sure why that was being weird. All right. So, yeah. All right, so Crohn's disease is more small intestine. Um, it might require bowel resection. Literally, they could this can kill the intestines. You get ulcers in the wall. They're eating the submucosa. They're a horrible pain because a lot of nerves and blood vessels are there. And obviously, you can't absorb nutrients if you have a messed up intestinal wall in the duodenum. So, a lot of diarrhea, weight loss, cramping, bleeding, horrible, horrible. And they could even um, have to do a bowel resection where they remove pieces of intestine from the middle and sew the two ends together to try and give you a functional intestine. Bad stuff. Um, anyway, and and Crohn's disease is one of the things that is that this isn't an FDA approved treatment that people have tried treating with parasitic worms. I know that sounds crazy, but since Crohn's disease tends to be an autoimmune disorder, the hypothesis for this is we'll give the immune system something to do other than attack the body. Anyway, let's move on. Polyps. Polyps are little growths, small tumors that are growing in the lining of the colon. So you got cells dividing out of control. They might be benign or they might be cancerous. Benign ones, obviously, still not good. If you can detect it while it's a polyp, you cut the polyp out. If it spreads, if it metastasizes, then you've got to go through the full gamut of other cancer treatments, which can really, let's just put it this way, large doses of chemo and radiation, they're not good for the, they have a strong impact on how well you can enjoy your life. Anyway, let's see. So if you have polyps, oh, right here, yeah, that's where it says it. Too much dietary fat can cause colon cancer. Having enough fiber in the diet can reduce the risk of colon cancer, probably because it helps to remove the fat. I'm thinking lots of dietary fiber, absorbing water, rubbing against the walls, removing stuff. Okay, remove the cancer causing agents in the feces. All right. Here's a check your progress. I'll pause and let you guys finish that up and or see if you can answer the questions. And then when we continue, we'll finish up. There's going to be a lot of talk here about nutrition and some big tables. Won't spend too much time on the tables. Just say, yeah, you need to know that. All right, go ahead and see if you can answer these. Let's move on. All right, so we'll talk about body mass index and health, and identify different types of nutrients in the body. So obesity is being overweight. It is one of the biggest health problems in the United States. A third of adults, almost a fifth, 20%. The actual number is 17, so that's close, but almost a fifth of kids are obese. Obesity is not just being overweight, it's significantly overweight. So excess body fat associated with higher risk of premature death, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, stroke, osteoarthritis, certain types of cancer. It's having a BMI, obesity is defined as a BMI of 30 or greater. Your weight in kilograms is divided by your height in meters squared. All right. Here is a list of different BMIs, and 30 would be obese, and 40 would be extremely obese. I'm going to point out here that don't memorize that thing about how to calculate the BMI because meters squared is a surface area. I think this slide is wrong. So know the number 30, BMI 30. Don't worry about the implied formula there or stated formula, because I'm pretty sure that the denominator is not that. All right. There's a BMI chart. Let's see. And it's a chart. You can read the chart. It has weight on the x-axis, and it has height on the y-axis. And okay, so let's move on. We're talking about different types of nutrients. Your four major macromolecules this will sound similar to that, because we're going to talk about the carbs, the proteins, the lipids again, but we're going to add trace elements, minerals and vitamins. A lot of those things like calcium, of course, are used in your bone, your hydroxyapatite, but calcium is also used in things like making muscles contract. Other minerals, sodium, potassium, super important for how your nerves work. And vitamins, both minerals and vitamins, they're cofactors, they're coenzymes. They're things that activate your enzymes and make them work. Some enzymes don't work without these at all because they're part of the active site. All right, so anything that is a required thing that we get out of food that performs a physiological function we call a nutrient. This could be something that gives you energy, something that promotes growth, something that regulates cellular metabolism. There are your examples we just talked about. Moving on. So carbs, you could have simple ones, you could have complex ones. It says glucose, simple sugar, all true. A better definition would be to say macro versus, poly versus simple. If it is a simple carbohydrate, a monosaccharide, that means it has one ring of carbon. If it is made out of a whole bunch of those, it is a polymer made out of a bunch of simple carbohydrate monomers, simple sugar monomers, then it's a complex carb. Anyway, but these complex carbs we take in the body are broken down to be during digestion into the monosaccharides. So Starch will get broken down into glucose. Glucose is the monomer that is taken across the wall of the intestine. All right. Says, although body cells can use fatty acids as an energy source, the brain cells require glucose. We've talked about that before. I'm going to say almost all the time the brain cells require glucose. I have heard some research saying that under some circumstances, it might be possible to use fatty acids, but I wouldn't bet on that being a regular thing. Most people who've tried that starve to death. Anyway, any product made from refined grains, if we go white bread, cake, cookies, yeah, we eat too much of that. Part of refining the grain is taking out the fiber, and we already talked about the importance of fiber, how removing having enough fiber in the diet can get rid of things in the intestines that cause cancer. So complex carbs, things that need to be broken down, the legumes, the nuts, whole grains, those have also sources of vitamins, minerals, fiber, not just sources of carbohydrates. The insoluble fiber, stuff that can't dissolve in water, it adds bulk to your poop and stimulates the movement of the large intestine, preventing constipation. I know there are a lot of old people in check. Have you gone to the bathroom today? A lot of those people aren't eating enough fiber, aren't eating enough of these complex carbs that are full of fiber. Soluble fiber combines with bile salts, cholesterol, and that will stop you from absorbing the cholesterol. So having these complex carbs can lower your cholesterol, lower the amount of cholesterol that you take out of the food, put into the body. It doesn't stop you from making cholesterol already. Remember, cholesterol is a part of your plasma membranes on your cells, and your body will make some of it. The danger comes if we get too much from our food, and complex carbs are a way to reduce the amount. Okay, if you take in a whole bunch of carbs, it contributes to obesity. And let's see, the refined carbs tend to make your glucose level in your blood shoot high very quickly, and that can cause diabetes, insulin resistance. It can cause you to make fat. You might say, how? Well, fat is what your body does with sugars. If you have too many glucose floating around the blood, the body's like, oh, well, this is an energy source and this is important. And oh, but they're not doing anything with it. Well, we better save it for later on when they're going to, and they'll make fat out of it. All right, so here, table 9, a whole list of things you can do to reduce the amount of carbs in your diet. Worth looking at, might ask a question or two off of it. Moving on, proteins are made of 20 different amino acids. That's almost true. There are 20 common amino acids that are coded for in the DNA. And almost all of protein is made out of those. There are actually other amino acids as well. And those other amino acids, sometimes your body will make something and then it will say, well, we use this similar amino acid as a placeholder, but we'll swap it out for the one we really want later after we're done with the manufacturing. Anyway, so what I'm getting at is in nature, there are actually more than 20, but there are 20 that are coded for in DNA that we're aware of. Complete proteins have all of this. It says usually from animal sources. That's true, but like if you combine corn and beans, you can get a complete protein. The corn is not complete. The protein in corn is not complete. The protein in the legumes is not complete. The beans is not complete. But when you take both of them in at the same time, you get all 20. Actually, I shouldn't say all 20. You get all the ones you can. There are some things that we call essential amino acids that you must get from your food. Your body can't make those. A lot of these amino acids, you do that thing where you're like, oh, I don't have enough of this, so I'm going to take it and I'll modify it and turn it into the one I want. And then you will use it. But essential amino acids, we don't have the ability to manufacture. And so we can't manufacture them. We can't store them easily. We have to eat them to get them. And so there we go. That's the 8 essential amino acids. Moving on. Can proteins be harmful? If you take in too many, yeah. It could make you dehydrate. It could cause kidney stones. Not the protein in the red meat, but the high fats could be bad for you in the long run. Now let's talk about fats. So we got lipids, fats, oils, cholesterol. Saturated fats are saturated with, which means full of, hydrogen. You got all the hydrogen they can hold, and they tend to be solid at room temperature. Butter, meat fats, palm oil, coconut oil. So yeah, there are some plant sources. Unsaturated fats are better for your heart, but cis and trans, for instance, are bad. So corn oil, safflower oil, it says high in polyunsaturated fatty acids. Poly means many, unsaturated means you've got double or triple bonds in that chain of fat. So we have a fatty acid chain and it's long chain. So long chain, if it's got all the hydrogens it can hold, it is saturated with hydrogen. That's what we're talking about when we talk about a saturated fat. But that means we can pack them really close together, and because they're straight, just saturated fats are straight. We can pack them really close together, and that's why they tend to be solid at room temperature. Unsaturated fats they are not saturated with hydrogen. They don't have all the hydrogen they could, so they have kinks, they have bends in that long chain. And that means you can't pack them quite as close together. That's why they tend to be more liquid at room temperatures. So polyunsaturated, examples would be linoleic acid, olive oil, canola oil have more monounsaturated fats. Not as good as a poly, but you know, the omega-3 fatty acids says preserve brain function, protect against heart disease. Flax and cold water fish are nice sources. I do want to point out that the fish don't make much omega-3. That comes from their foods. And as we overfish, that may not be, it may be hard to get the omega-3s that way. We might have to start eating some of the things that fish do. I know the famous oceanographer Sylvia Earle, she doesn't eat fish. She eats like people are, oh, you need, the doctor says you need omega-3 fatty acids. Here's a little pill you can take. Well, you could make those pills out of things other than fish, things that fish eat. And so that's what she does. Anyway, moving on. So here's a nice chart showing monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and saturated fats. And you can see that polyunsaturated fats, the thing that they're the most common in is safflower oil. And safflower is one of the ingredients, one of the things you can use that'll give a good flavor to your food as well. Anyway, so there you go, looking at it. Moving on. Can lipids be harmful? Of course they can. Saturated fats can cause arteriosclerosis. They can make plaques, make it hard for blood to flow. When people talk about getting hardening of the arteries, that's what they're talking about. Cholesterol is carried by two different kinds of transport proteins. HDL, high density lipoprotein, and LDL, low density lipoprotein. HDL, they carry it off to the liver where it gets metabolized. The LDL, that cholesterol might get dumped in the tissues in the arteries. Okay. So ways to reduce fats. We've got a list of proteins that are lower in fat. Chicken, fish, legumes. Take the skin off of the stuff and it will be lower fat. You can broil rather than bake or fry. Talks about how to season vegetables, how to cook, season food, how to cook food. So yeah, this page talks about cholesterol and fats, and I want to point out right there at the very bottom, increased soluble fiber in the diet, oat bran, oatmeal, beans, corn. You have to understand, it's not that oatmeal is magical. For a while, people acted like it was, but it'll help bulk up the feces, just like we talked about before, rub against the wall, remove some of that fat before, and remove some of that cholesterol before it can cause damage. All right, so trans fats they're super uncommon in nature. I was going to say don't exist in nature. I don't know of an example, but they might. Cis and trans, suppose you have an unsaturated fat. So we've got a long chain, that's the saturated fat. An unsaturated fat will have a double bond in it or a triple bond in it. If it's a double bond, you're going to get a kink in that long chain. If the two side chains, so we have the chain, the kink, the chain, if they're arranged like this, like here's the double bond in between, and they are like this, then we would say it is a cis fat. If you have them go like that, where you have the chain, the double bond, and then the chain continues, that would be a trans fat. Trans meaning across, the two parts are across the double bond from each other. Trans fats. Okay, so anyway, trans fats, they aren't very common in nature. They tend to be things that we make when we take a polyunsaturated fat, and under high heat, we add hydrogen to them and make them slightly less unsaturated. That can be really bad because your body, trans fats aren't too common in nature, and your body is not super good at breaking down these trans fats because the enzymes aren't used to them. There could be some toxic byproducts in the process, mildly toxic. All right, so let's move on to minerals, happier subject. We have major minerals and trace minerals. Trace minerals you need a little bit of. Major minerals you need a lot of. Okay, so 100 milligrams per day. Trace less than 100 milligrams per day. Major minerals, often they're part of the tissue itself. Trace minerals, like I've said before, they might be like, you need iodine to prevent goiter. You need iron so you can make hemoglobin. You need the example I was going to use was a vitamin, not a mineral. We'll probably talk about the difference. One is a coenzyme and the other is a cofactor, but they do the same thing. They activate enzymes. And vitamin B is super important for carboxylic anhydrase, that the enzyme that does the blood buffering or helps you with the blood buffering. It doesn't have the right shape to do its job if it doesn't have B vitamins. Anyway, let's move on. So here we have a table with different minerals, where what they do, where we get them, what happens if you have too little, what happens if you have too much. Definitely look it over. We can ask some questions based on this table, but they're pretty. These are the types of things that I expect if you've been paying attention to your diet, you've probably already heard. They're not picking weird things to jump out. You're like, huh? These are well known. All right, so moving on. Occasionally, people don't get enough iron, calcium, magnesium, or zinc. If you don't get enough iron, you might have anemia because you're having trouble making hemoglobin for red blood cells. If you don't get enough calcium, you might have brittle bones. You might, if you had extremely low amounts, you might have muscle problems. So things like that. Adult females need more iron in their diet than males because hemoglobin is necessary in blood, and during menstruation you're going to bleed, so you're going to lose some iron every month, every 28 days. A varied and complete diet, it says, usually supplies enough of each type, but if you don't have a lot of variation in your diet, it doesn't hurt to take some supplements. I'm not super big on supplements, but yeah. Calcium, it's found in your bones, it's found in your teeth. It's needed for muscle contraction, blood clotting. It prevents osteoporosis, which of course happens in the elderly, especially elderly women. Although I'll be honest, since women tend to live a little bit longer than men, it may just be the elderly and we see it more in women. Anyway, but you hear people talk about it more in women, and it makes sense because men start out with slightly more dense bones than women do. And so it may just be that the loss of calcium as the bones become more porous with age is more obvious in women because more women get to a critical stage. Anyway, vitamin D can prevent this. Vitamin D can prevent bone loss. And we can get vitamin D in supplements, or we can get it from, it's part of the process when you're in the sun. Your skin can help you make vitamin D as it absorbs sunlight. Of course, then you got on the flip side, you got the skin cancer option. Anyway, sodium for water balance. And so it's talking about the movement of materials across the plasma membrane, as well as conduction of a nerve impulse. What they're talking about there is that sodium and potassium are the two most important chemicals in nerve conduction. You tend to have sodium on the outside of the cell and potassium on the inside, and then when you're going to send a signal down the axon of the nerve, you have sodium rushing into the nerve, and eventually, as it gets too positive inside, you'll have the potassium rush out to compensate. You have to pump those back to their original places before the nerve can fire again. So it happens super fast. But if you don't have enough sodium and potassium, then the nerve may not work. So recommended amount of sodium intake per day, 1,500 milligrams. A lot of people take a lot worse. If you have too much sodium, it can cause hypertension, high blood pressure. Totally true. If you have extreme low amounts, like in the case of water toxicity, where people drink huge amounts of water. Usually this is people doing things on a dare. You would never drink that much water on your own. But like we've heard of fraternity hazings, where people drank so much water that it ended up stopping their hearts. Really bad stuff. Hold on, I'm going to get a link up about that. Okay, I just pulled up a link about water toxicity and how drinking too much water can cause damage. In this case, it was a hazing and it killed the person. Anyway, let's move on. So then there's a list of ways to avoid taking in too much sodium, and they're pretty straightforward. Don't use salt, but the whole thing comes down to don't use salt. But there are a list of things you may not think of, like bacon, that actually are super high in salt. All right, let's move on. So vitamins are organic compounds used for metabolism. That's a generic way of saying it. But a lot of them are coenzymes, meaning they work with the enzyme. The enzyme is inactive if it doesn't get the vitamin. The example I used before talking to you guys was one of the vitamin B's and carboxylic anhydrase. Anyway, there are two types. They're fat soluble, water soluble. A, D, E, and K are the fat soluble vitamins, and most of the others are water soluble. Like vitamin C is water soluble. Here's the difference. You can't really, it's almost impossible to take too much vitamin C. Since vitamin C is also called ascorbic acid, it's acid, you might be able to take too much because it's an acid, but your body just pees the stuff out. If you take excess vitamin C, you're just gonna lose it in your urine. You'll pee it out. You take too much A, D, E, or K, those things stay in your body. They stay in your liver, and it's possible to have too much A, D, E, or K and shorten your life. I should probably pull up a link about that too. I'm not going to, though, because I'm low on battery. Anyway, let's move on. So antioxidants, things that stop oxidation. Basically, oxygen is super, when we talk about free radicals, they are things that are really hungry for oxygen. I'm sorry, they're really hungry for electrons. And we call them oxidants because oxygen is super hungry for electrons, and it will mess up other compounds by stealing their electrons. So vitamin C, E, A, those are things you can get out of fruits, vegetables, but they are things that tear those apart because you eat enough of them. Let them donate the electrons, and they're not attacking the molecules that are part of your body. So basically, it gives they're antioxidants because they give the oxidants something to do other than screw up your tissues. Let's move on. Here's the pretty table. Again, I would know this table. These are things you've probably heard before, though. It's where do you get these particular vitamins? So this is the fat soluble, the A, D, E, and K. The next table, I'm sure, will be the ones that are water soluble, that you can eat all you want of. These are the ones that you should limit the amount of eating. Yeah, the next one is your water soluble. These, take all you want, you're gonna pee out the extra. All right, so yeah. Vitamin D, your skin cells have a chemical precursor, one of the things that will become vitamin D if you're exposed to UV light in the sun. It's modified in the kidneys and liver and becomes calcitrol, which makes the intestines absorb more calcium. So what that means is getting enough sunlight or enough vitamin D from your food, either one, is necessary for absorbing calcium in the intestines. If you don't, you won't get enough calcium. You'll have weak bones. That's what rickets is. Where you see, oh, this milk is vitamin D milk, fortified milk. It's to try and give kids who are indoors too much, possibly, certainly more than in the past, to give them, make their bones stronger. All right. Here is the thing. The Choose My Plate is the replacement for the old food pyramid. What they're trying to say is that grains and vegetables should make up most of what you eat, and that fruit should be less common, protein should be less common. Dairy should be a little bit on the side. That's the recommendation they're shooting for. And like I said, this is the replacement for the food pyramid. All right, so we're going to talk about eating disorders. I'm surprised they didn't have a check your knowledge right there. Anyway, anorexia nervosa, extreme fear of getting fat. People will starve themselves, and to the point that they're very unhealthy, more unhealthy than they would be if they had more fat. They might even purge, so they'll like binge and purge. They will eat and then either intentionally make themselves vomit or intentionally take laxatives and make themselves poop it out, hoping they can do that before they absorb any of the nutrients. It's real extreme behavior. Bulimia is when they do eat a lot of the high calorie food, they do the binge, but then they purge. So both of these are food disorders, and both of the ones listed are based on people having a fear of getting fat. Binge eating disorder could be, that's a little different. You eat, but then you don't purge. If someone does too much purging and they do it by making themselves vomit, a lot of times the stomach acid will actually eat the back of their teeth, cause their teeth to degrade. It's also possible to get an eating disorder if you think your muscles are too small. You can spend all the time working on your muscles, and it makes you unable to do the other things in life that you should be doing. All right, here's the check your progress. See if you can answer the questions. If not, go back and look at the PowerPoints again. I'm going to pause for a minute. All right, let's continue. Oh, and that was the end. All right, we are done with chapter 9. I know that was a long chapter. Let's go ahead and get this uploaded so you have it.